whole world in one show. That's our aim today as we make a pilgrimage from pole to pole. We follow the humpback whales as they head north from the Antarctic to the Great Barrier Reef. And the whooper swans, who set their compasses for Iceland. There's the Little Penguin Parade, an Australian spectacle that draws 500,000 spectators every year. And life on top of the world, the wind-blown ice sheets of the Arctic. Now there's only one continent you can describe like this. The coldest, remotest, highest, windiest place on Earth. Yes, it's Antarctica.
Virtually nothing lives in the cold heart of the world's last great wilderness. But there is life along its edges, and plenty of it. These are Weddell seals. They're found all round the continent, and they have a dual insulation system, fur and then fat. When their fur gets wet, a thick insulating layer of blubber keeps them warm. They survive the 4 months of midwinter darkness by staying largely below the ice, breathing through air holes. Their lungs and blood vessels are very efficient at absorbing oxygen. By slowing down their metabolism, they can make one lungful of air last for an hour. And they've been known to dive to 700 meters. They feed mainly on krill, tiny animal plankton that live in these rich Antarctic seas. The seals have strong, forward-pointing canine teeth with which they widen ice cracks into holes. And by grinding down the edges with their teeth, they make access to the water easier. Though broken and worn-down teeth can become a serious, life-shortening handicap. The seal pups are born in early summer. At first, they rely entirely on their mother's milk, a rich source of food, for by the time they're weaned, after about 6 weeks, they'll have doubled their birth weight. But even though the Antarctic is very remote, they don't have it all to themselves. There are 5 species of penguin here. The most common is the adderley, and the best way of getting along the ice is by turning yourself into a sledge. They're great travelers. Their feeding grounds are 800 kilometers out in the southern Atlantic, but it's here that they return to breed, along Antarctica's rocky coastline. They build their nests out of stones, and the courtship ceremony begins with the male going off and collecting a pebble, which he then drops at the foot of his intended partner. The distinctive facial markings of this pair distinguishes them as chinstrap penguins. They nest near the adderley colonies, the females laying 2 eggs each. But thereafter, it's the males that stay around. They're left all alone to incubate and protect the eggs. They have nothing to eat for weeks on end, while the females disappear out to sea, looking for food. The Antarctic doubles in size when the seas freeze. But at the end of the winter months, the floes begin to break up. The plankton in the water blooms. There's an abundance of krill, fish and squid. And the Weddell Sea becomes one of the richest marine systems in the world. The penguin chicks remain in their rocky nests for about 22 days. Then, for protection, while both their parents are out fishing, they join a creche. Finally, at about 70% of their adult body weight, they too take to the South Polar Seas. The Norwegian Roald Amundsen won the race to the South Pole. He made his crossing during the Antarctic summer, when amazingly there are more hours of sunshine than most equatorial countries experience in a whole year. But it's not only in cold places that penguins are found. You get them in South Africa, New Zealand, and here in southern Australia.
Emperor penguins stand 70 centimetres tall. But little penguins, once called fairy penguins, are less than half that size. And they're the only type that leave the land at dawn and don't return until dusk. Out at sea, they feed on pilchards, anchovies and squid. And one of their nesting sites is Phillip Island, just off the coast near Melbourne. It was declared a national park in 1996, and there are 26,000 little penguins on the island, nearly all in a special 340-hectare reserve, where they are closely monitored by Andre. He's a research scientist here, and he uses a range of ingenious devices to identify, check and weigh his little guests. This is the weighing station that he's brushing out. It's located in a natural funnel in the dunes that the penguins use to reach the beach. As they pass over it, they're weighed without even knowing it. There are also 2 laser beams that can tell which way the birds are travelling, from the sea or to the sea. A bottle, more or less the weight of a little penguin, is used to check that it's working. Not all the penguins will pass this way, and so Andre also has a penguin detector, which he can use to identify others that have been tagged. Little penguins maintain burrows even when it's not the breeding season. They use them to rest in after their long day out at sea. There are nesting boxes all over the reserve, and the detector tells Andre who's in them. When they're molting, getting rid of old feathers and growing a new set, they're no longer waterproof, so can't go out to feed. This is a tricky period for a penguin, and it's vital to know exactly what a molting bird's weight is. This little penguin has to store up enough fat to get it through the 17-day molt. If it doesn't, it ends up starved, is forced to leave its burrow, and then, in the hot Australian sun, can get so dehydrated it might die. And so there's even a penguin hospital here for birds that came into molt too early, before they had put on enough weight. And Leanne takes care of its patients. One chick, now in the hospital, was illegally taken from the island as a pet, but was later found abandoned in the city of Melbourne and brought back. A lucky escape. They don't get nearly as much exercise here as they would in the wild, and so they're all encouraged to swim. Penguins like their food live, and they're used to catching their own fish. They can't do that here, so they're fed by hand. They're also given extra multivitamins to help them regain their strength. And when they're strong enough, they're taken back to the beach. By now they'll have been tagged so that they can be identified later. And their beaks will have been measured to determine their sex. The males have slightly thicker beaks. After the small hospital swimming pool, the sea is a bit daunting at first. But this little penguin soon gets the idea. Each year, 500,000 people come to Phillip Island to see the penguin parade. And as the sun sets, they gather on the beach. The revenue they generate helps fund the reserve. But it's nothing compared to the enthusiasm the little penguins generate every day when they arrive en masse, up to 1,000 coming ashore within the first few hours of darkness. Pole to pole is our subject. We'll get to the Arctic eventually. But first, from the pole to the tropics, Antarctica to the Great Barrier Reef, and back.
Stretching along the edge of the warm coral sea is the greatest spectacle of the underwater world. 2,000 kilometers of coral reef that supports 2,000 different species of fish. But there's a visitor to these tropical seas off the Queensland coast. A warm-blooded mammal that's come a long way. Humpback whales that left the Antarctic 5,000 kilometers away when the pack ice began to form. Covering about 1,500 kilometers a month, they slowly migrate northeast until they find themselves here in their native Coral Sea calving grounds. Because they're slow swimmers and calve so near the shore, they were a prime target for early whalers. But they gained worldwide protection in 1966, and since then, their numbers have been increasing, though the current population is still only a fraction of its former size. The calves, which weigh over 2 tons at birth, feed off their mother's rich milk and gain weight rapidly. The mothers, on the other hand, don't feed at all and live entirely off their stores of blubber. On the whale's return journey to the Antarctic, the pods often stop off at Fraser Island, the world's largest sand island, just off the coast near Brisbane. And it's here that they put on their aerial displays, spectacular backflips, and slapping the water with a noise like a gunshot. They also sing. When competing for mates, the mature males sing the longest and most complicated song in the entire animal kingdom. It can go on for 20 minutes. The pods then turn southwest, heading for the Antarctic spring. The mothers are now hungry, and the pack ice is breaking up. Flocks of birds are attracted by the shoals of krill and small fish which are flourishing, and it's time to feed and prepare for the next migration. Each whale eats about 1,300 kilograms of food a day. They feed in social groups of up to 22 males, and they have a cunning hunting technique. Having located krill or a shoal of fish, the whales circle beneath it, blowing out bubbles as they spiral slowly upwards. This cylindrical wall of bubbles acts rather like a net, concentrating the fish and forcing them towards the surface. The whales then open their mouths, expand their throats, and lunge up through the dense mass of fish. They're wonderful long-distance swimmers and artful hunters. And although their food is minute, they are huge. One individual humpback weighs as much as 11 elephants, or 600 people. The humpbacks head away from the pole and into the tropics to breed. But the world's largest waterfowl do the opposite.
These whooper swans have spent their winter in Norfolk on Britain's eastern shore. But the changes in temperature and day length that herald spring turn their thoughts towards the Arctic. Most whooper swans that overwinter in Britain are from the Icelandic breeding population. And that's where these birds are heading, that land of steam and ice only just below the Arctic Circle. Over the Outer Hebrides, swans fitted with an altimeter have been recorded as high as 8,200 metres, flying in a V formation, making use of the slipstream effect. They navigate by the sun during the day and, if they fly at night, by the stars. After their 800-kilometre flight, Iceland is still a magical place for them. 40% of it is glacier and lava field, but there are still plenty of rivers and hot springs in which the swans can take up residence. Less than 1/5 of the country is covered with vegetation, but as the ice melts, in some places flowers bloom and cotton grass buds into life. The swans lay a clutch of about 5 eggs, which hatch about a month later. The young swans, or cygnets, spend their polar summer here, building up strength for the long trip back to Britain. They look serene, but there's an Icelandic saying that's possibly closer to the truth. The raven has a devilish voice but a heavenly spirit, but the swan has a heavenly voice and a devilish spirit. Well, maybe they're not that aggressive, but they like to be left alone. These days, whooper swan migrations between Iceland and the British Isles are tracked by satellite, and their paths and the positions of all their stops are accurately recorded. The flight takes about 4 days. Our final story takes us due north, to the very top of the world, an ocean enclosed by continents, the Arctic.
The only creature that migrates pole to pole is the Arctic tern. It enjoys the southern summer in Antarctica, the northern summer up here, a 35,000 kilometre round trip that links up the extreme latitudes. Encircled by the northernmost regions of Asia, Europe and North America, the frigid Arctic Ocean is home to the beluga whale. Beluga means the white one in Russian. They're extremely social, living in pods of up to 25 individuals. And as the sea ice melts, they move slowly northwards, though they'll also venture up the estuaries of the northern rivers in search of fish and squid. Also swimming in these icy seas are creatures once called whale horses, now known, of course, as walruses. Weighing over 1,000 kilos, they're so hefty they sometimes use their long tusks to haul themselves out of the water and up onto the ice. To be included within the Arctic Circle, a region must have one day when the sun never rises or never sets. It includes parts of Norway, Sweden, Finland, Russia, America, Canada, and Greenland. And its most regal wanderer is the polar bear. Carefully sniffing the snow and then the air, their ears quivering, they can smell the presence of seals in a blowhole over 30 kilometers away. The seals themselves are ever alert. They're well aware of the danger of polar bears, who are so powerful they can scoop a seal from the water with one swift swipe of a paw. The blubber of a ringed or bearded seal gives out an irresistible scent to another northern inhabitant, who often follows in the bear's paw prints. Arctic foxes make do with carrion, but they prefer lemmings, which they dig from the snow with their paws. Polar bears also know how to get through the ice, to attack the seals beneath. When it's thin enough, they'll rear up on their hind legs, then drop down using the whole weight of their bodies to crack the ice open. And there's one story of the Greenland explorer Knut Rasmussen, where he and the bear ended up in the same ice hole. As they gazed into each other's eyes, they grew to understand each other, and the hunter suddenly knew that this magnificent animal was not to be killed, but allowed to live. These tracks lead us to a polar bear den. It's autumn, and a pregnant female has buried herself within it. In about 2 months' time, she'll give birth, and then she and the cubs will stay there a further 6 months until the next spring. As the sun sets over the Arctic, we too have now traveled pole to pole, 20,000 kilometers across this wonderful planet of ours.
The seashore and its beaches catch our eye this week. In Britain, to resist the tug of the tide, you've got to hold on tight. In Ireland, where the shores should be freezing, like this, they're actually like this. There are beaches 1,000 kilometres inland, in the heart of Amazonia. And beaches where the ghosts come out day and night. There are some shorelines where even more ghostly survivors give us a fascinating glimpse into the ancient past. We start descending not through the mists of time, but through the clouds above the Isle of Lundy.
Not even 5 kilometres long and less than 20 kilometres from land, Lundy is nevertheless one of the most isolated places in Britain. A lump of granite set down in the middle of the Bristol Channel. It's a perfect hideaway. Pirates and smugglers have used it since the 12th century. But today, its few inhabitants are more sedate, and it's become something of a tourist attraction. Many come to see its famous puffins. The name Lundy derives from the Norse word for puffin, although today their numbers have declined from the 70,000 who once nested and bred here. Grey seals bask near the shore. A youngster takes a short nap, lying on his back on the seabed, under the watchful eye of an adult. After a doze of 5 or 10 minutes, the young seal rises back to the surface for air. These waters contain some of the most important marine habitats in the whole of the British Isles. And since 1986, a zone around the coastline, 1.5 kilometres wide, has been designated a marine nature reserve. Here, the sea floor is richly carpeted with life, and many strange and wonderful creatures live here. Hidden away in dark crevices and gullies are tube-shaped fan worms. They build their tubes themselves, using a mixture of mucus and silt. And they rely on the movement of the tides to waft water over their delicate fans, filtering out any tiny particles of food. But the tidal flow here is anything but gentle. Twice a day, the tide surging in from the Atlantic is channeled through the many narrow gullies near the shore. It soon builds into a powerful force, against which everything must hold on for dear life if it's not to be wrenched away. To survive this titanic tug-of-war, creatures have evolved all sorts of cunning strategies. Brittle stars, a type of starfish, cling to the rocks and hold a leg in the air while they're feeding. But during strong tides, they link these legs together to form a living carpet. The specially adapted pectoral fins of the lumpsucker fish act as a suction cup. After the danger is past, it simply lets go and drifts away. As night shrouds the island, a creature with even stronger suckers comes out to feed. The northern octopus oozes out of its rocky lair. Nearby, a swimming crab backs itself under the loose shingle, attempting to hide. The octopus feels around for its supper. Within seconds, it covers the hapless swimming crab, then slides back towards its den to digest its meal. As the sun slowly rises over Lundy's rich, tide-worn coastline. From the shores of Lundy, we head southwest across the Atlantic to another kind of beach, buried in the heart of the jungle.
Golden-backed wackarees are only found in the rainforests that border the mighty Rio Negro, one of the tributaries to the even mightier Amazon. Not a place you'd expect to find a beach, but it's currently the dry season. During this time of year, the water levels drop dramatically, enough to expose the sand, washed down over the centuries from the mountains at the river's source. Fast-growing plants take advantage of the newly available space, along with animals, like these skimmers. They lay their eggs in simple hollows in the sand. The sun's rays do the incubating. In fact, they can overheat the eggs. Whereas most birds need to keep their eggs warm, the skimmers now have to do the opposite. They wet their feet and bellies before settling on the nest, thus lowering the temperature and cooling the eggs. To stop themselves overheating, the birds pant. The males and females take turns at nest duty. As the sun sets, the darkness draws other creatures out onto these temporary stretches of sand. A red-headed turtle mother has crawled up a beach range to lay her eggs. She digs a hole with her powerful flippers and then drops up to 14 eggs into it before covering it with sand. And her night's work isn't over yet. She will lay more than one clutch before heading back to the water. At first light, the turtle's nighttime labours have not gone unnoticed, up in the trees. The golden-backed wackarees are one of the few South American primates bold enough to venture down onto the forest floor. It's dangerous down there, but a breakfast of fresh turtle eggs is just too tempting to pass up, though sometimes it's safer to eat it back up in the trees. Not all the eggs were discovered though, and after 40 days of incubating sunlight, the sand begins to move. The baby red-headed turtles hastily make their way down to their new home, in the river. Their birth has been beautifully synchronized by nature and by evolution. If they were to emerge any later, the river would have risen, and while struggling to escape their eggs, they would probably drown. Once they reach the water, their first perilous journey survived. Their life truly begins. It's time now to find some food. These underwater branches are covered with tiny fish eggs, and the baby turtles gorge themselves. But a carnivorous tucanari fish is also patrolling this stretch of the river. It can weigh over 15 kilos and dwarfs the tiny turtles, who are unaware of the approaching meat eater. But the eggs on the branch aren't the tucanaris, and it doesn't seem interested in the turtles, who, in turn, will grow to quite a size themselves, feeding off this strange rainforest shore. But let's go back now to a more ancient time, when there were giant turtles in the open seas, their shells the size of a small boat.
The prehistoric ancestors of this octopus once filled these waters. And seagoing reptiles hunted in these oceans. Today, that past is compressed within these cliffs on the south coast of England. 200 million years ago, they were covered by sea. The creatures that died here sank into the soft, muddy sea floor, becoming forever preserved as fossils. That sea floor is now the flaky cliffside, prone to collapse, and so releasing its hidden treasures. In 1810, a 12-year-old child named Mary Anning searched these beaches. What she found, along with subsequent finds, would make her one of the world's foremost fossil hunters. It was Mary Anning who uncovered the fossilized remains of a 5-meter-long creature, unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. With flippers instead of feet and a vicious set of teeth, it was called the ichthyosaur, meaning fish-like reptile. And on that same coast today, in the town of Charmouth in Lyme Bay, people are still looking for fossils and finding them. Charmouth Fossils is a shop which deals in small local finds. But Tony Gill, the shop owner, has also found much larger fossils. He's currently cleaning excess rock from the jaws of his latest, a 12-meter-long ichthyosaur, the largest ever found. The Charmouth Marine Heritage Centre is directly above the shop.
We're underneath an ancient sea called the Tethys Sea. It doesn't exist.
And here, Ben Totterdale, the centre manager, talks to groups interested in finding out more about the area's ancient past.
Other creatures such as the nautilus, which is a close relative, and other creatures that are in the same family.
The model he's holding is an impression of what an ammonite might have looked like when alive over 100 million years ago. It's related to our present-day octopus and squid.
Different chambers all linked together. Now, the ammonite shell is actually a far more complicated mechanism than you...
Only the shells remain, not the soft tissue. But you can clearly see the chambers inside, which the animal filled or emptied to lower or raise itself in the water. A system still used by the present-day nautilus, and of course, by submarines. After the talk, it's down to the beach, where the thrill of a 200 million-year-old find is open to everyone. Fossil hunting is really just about looking. Over time, original bone minerals are dissolved and replaced with other minerals, creating a rock-like copy, a fossil. Any rock could contain a fossil buried inside it. But if you know what you're looking for, there are telltale signs. Ben's found a stone with some white marks on its side. a possible indication of something interesting within.
I think I've actually got one here. Do you want to come and have a look?
He dons a pair of goggles to prevent chips of rock flying into his eyes, and using a fossil hammer, he carefully taps the stone. It splits along a natural fault line and reveals what they've all been looking for: a miraculously preserved example of Charmouth sea life 180 million years ago. Today, fossil hunting is even more popular than it was in Mary Anning's time, and the bay's beaches continue to be browsed for the treasures they hold. The octopus, like many cephalopods, fires ink as a way of escaping. Fossils of ancient cephalopods called belemnites have been found with similar ink sacs. But did you know that these fossilized sacs were scraped to form a powder which was then mixed with water? With the resulting ink, it was possible to write a 180 million year old note. Head west from Lyme Bay and you'll reach the very edge of Europe. And then there's nothing but water until you hit Canada.
This is the mighty Atlantic, striking the rocky coastline of Ireland's County Kerry with unrestrained fury. But the sea, despite its forcefulness, brings with it great benefits. The Irish coastline is washed by the Gulf Stream, and its warming waters greatly influence the climate here. Killarney National Park lies on the coast, and it's a very wet place indeed. Over 1,000 millimetres of rain fall during 220 rainy days a year. But although the coastal storms are harsh, the winters inland are mild, creating a unique environment. Because of the sea's moderating influence, spring comes to Killarney about a month before the rest of Ireland, as early as February. Killarney was Ireland's first national park and is considered the Irish Lake District. A quarter of the park is water, with 3 large lakes. On an island in the biggest of the lakes, a famous chronicle of the known world, the Annals of Innisfallen, was written between the 11th and 13th centuries. Red deer graze among the trees during winter, the only wild herd of native red deer left in Ireland. It's a kind of sight those ancient chroniclers would have seen. This mild yet unpredictable place shares the same latitude with Labrador on the opposite side of the Atlantic. Yet Labrador at this time of year is a cold and barren place, with temperatures plummeting to -34 degrees Celsius. In fact, the very surface of the sea remains frozen until May. But here in Killarney, with such mild, damp weather, the woods are carpeted with a thick green moss, over 15 centimetres deep in places. And it's home to one of the area's most unique visitors. There it is, the Kerry spotted slug. It might not look so amazing, but this slug's only other home is over 1,000 kilometres away in the moist forests of Portugal. Perhaps it once ranged more widely across Europe, killed off in less mild places by the last ice age, or perhaps it somehow migrated up from Portugal. Whatever its origin, the slug only survives here because of the Gulf Stream. A remarkable example of the interconnectedness of life, how an ocean current from the other side of the Atlantic can promote life here in Killarney, over 6,000 kilometres away. In the 15th century, John Cabot sailed his ship, the Matthew, across the Atlantic to the New World. Along the way, he must have passed through the Gulf Stream. He didn't know what it was, but he realised he was in warmer waters by the fact that the beer, being kept cool in the hold, suddenly went off. From Ireland, we also head out across the Atlantic to the eastern shores of the USA, where there are ghosts on the coasts.
Under the cover of darkness, a small beach-coloured creature emerges from its sandy burrow. The ghost crab is so named because it can disappear and then reappear right before your very eyes as it constantly digs and redigs its sandy shelter. But this one has spotted a lone baby turtle. Both scavenger and vicious predator, it heads off. The overturned turtle is twice the crab's size, but it's still dragged back to the crab's burrow. Among other things, the crabs feed on turtle eggs and hatchlings. But it's this young hatchling's lucky day. It somehow escapes. The little turtle must make it to the water if it's to survive. The ghost crab, on the other hand, is what's called semi-terrestrial. Its gills, which have developed into primitive lungs, allow it to live on the land. But every so often, it has to dip itself in the sea to cover its gills with oxygen-rich water. Dawn marks the end of the ghost crab's busiest time. But they don't completely shun the day and can still be found skittering across the beach like little white pebbles. And now it's the crab's turn to be hunted. It's been spotted by a ruddy turnstone. It's off. Ghost crabs are the fastest crabs on land, running at 15 kilometers an hour. This one knows exactly where to find its burrow. But ghost crabs are not only found on the American coast, they crop up all over the world. Here in Western Australia, a different species of ghost crab is also on the lookout for food. Here there's plenty to scavenge, and the crabs don't always need to waste energy on a hunt. With their eyes popping out on stalks, they look aggressive. But they do tolerate each other. There are no real fights between males, just ritualized sparring matches. And when a large piece of food is found, the crabs come from all over, covering it with a mass of legs. And now, as the tide gets lower, a different type of crab emerges. A veritable army of tiny crabs. But an army that doesn't advance sideways like most crabs, but forwards like most armies. Soldier crabs. With a name like that, you'd expect them to be far more vicious than their ghostly cousins. But nothing could be further from the truth. When the soldier crabs find a likely spot, they merely stop and filter the beach sand through their sieve-like mouths. Particles of food are retained, and the sand and water ejected. But there's no relaxing and enjoying your meal in this feeding ground. With the incoming tide, the crabs have to quickly twist themselves into the sand, or else they'd be washed out to sea. The vanishing soldiers and ghosts of this seashore world.